Hello, my name is Austin Gold.
And I'm Nate Jones.
And you are listening to the Best and Worst of the Best podcast. Today we have a special interview with someone from the industry, actually our professor here at the School of Northern Arizona. We have Mr. Harun Mehmedinovíc, if I'm saying that correctly.
That's pretty good.
So I guess to start you off, I want to get into Skyglow, but I also want to get into the current project that you're working on thus far. I know you don't want to give away too much, but I know it's a documentary. Could you give some insight as to what that documentary is about?
Yeah, it's specifically about methane.
Okay.
So methane is a form of gas that's been trapped in most places deep under the surface of the earth, and we usually get it out in order to use it. As you know, it's like gas, like gasoline. It's used to power certain things for several different reasons. But if it escapes by itself, without actually being collected by humans and used in a particular way and just goes into the atmosphere, if enough of it gathers in the atmosphere, the temperatures rise pretty rapidly at a certain point, and then it can get to a point which you'd refer to as extinction level event. Like if enough of it is up in the air, it's actually worse than a giant asteroid hitting the Earth. Basically, what you'd get is the atmosphere would heat up pretty rapidly, up to like 20, 30 degrees. There's disagreements as to how big or small this would be. But it would be big enough to pretty much wipe out all life on Earth except for single-cell organisms, so stuff that's way in the water somewhere. So, and that's a realistic possibility because it's happened already. So anybody that goes to one of these monuments around Arizona, like Grand Canyon or there's a few other ones, you'll be able to see sort of layers of different ages, so one we're probably very familiar here is Jurassic layer, because we have a lot of because of the erosion, because of the winds and because of the water, there's a lot of Jurassic layer exposed, so we see like dinosaur tracks and stuff like that. So one of these is Pleistocene layer, and that's the one where you'll actually see some damage that happened because of the amount of methane that used to be up in the air. And there was a point where there wasn't a possibility for life to be on Earth as beyond like one single cell organism. So can that happen again? It can, because it has happened again. The question is just how much methane is getting released. That there's a lot of studies being done, and that's going to take some time to determine. And then also, is there a possibility that the melting that's happening in the Arctic, because bulk of methane is in the Arctic, and in fact there's enough methane in the Arctic to cause this extinction level event if it's released. So the question is it going to get released? So there's lots of agreement on some of these things. Yes, it is getting released. There's a disagreement on to which degree, and to which degree can it get released in a very short amount of time. So some people are saying that's a portion of the scientific world that we're melting the glaciers and eventually all of the ice in the Arctic to such a degree that it's going to happen within our lifetimes, that we're going to release an enormous amount of methane, and that's going to cause this kind of catastrophe. And the other ones are saying it's going to happen maybe over thousands of years. And then some people are saying it's never going to happen to that degree. So we don't actually know 100%, but there's studies being done. It's probably going to be in the next 5-10 years where there's going to be a much clearer determination of that, because the ice melt in the Arctic, or actually around the world, but we're talking Arctic here specifically. There's a lot more methane in Arctic. There's practically none in the Antarctic. So it's really all around the North Pole in that area. So if that were all to melt, that'd be pretty catastrophic. It's melting pretty quickly, but we don't know how quickly quite yet. So it's going to take at least 5-10 more years, I would think, to get some kind of major consensus on it.
Is there a way to reverse that or stop it at the point it's at?
At this point, there probably isn't a way to reverse it, because we're not able to control anything at this point.
Right.
So the question is, can we devise systems to remedy it? So that's really more the question now. So there's now probably hundreds of scientists, thousands out there that are trying to develop different things. And one of them actually here is in, I think, University of Arizona. It's just basically down the road. And I think what he's figured out is a way to build these giant machines, which would then kind of suck the methane out as it's coming out, like collect it and then convert it to different things, like to fuel, to usable fuel, or actually some have ideas to convert it to oxygen and then remove certain components to it and use them for other purposes. So in other words, you would build these giant giant machines that be able to collect it and then convert it, because what you don't want is just pure methane going into the atmosphere. Any other thing is a better alternative. So now I think within probably next 10 years, as people take it more seriously, as there's a much more of a pressing need to do something about it, there's probably going to be many different systems that people devise as to what to do with methane. Methane is a very useful thing that we can do things with, but there isn't a system to collect it and to do anything with it in the Arctic, because we've never actually drilled in the Arctic for methane. It's actually forbidden to do that. So now we might have to find a solution for it, because it's going to come out by itself.
Right.
So you will be traveling around the world these next few months, essentially, because of this project. You'd recently gone on a trip for that, and I just want to know what it was like to get that call, because it was pretty spontaneous when you got to accept the idea for this documentary.
Yeah, it was last minute, because what had happened was they'd been working on this doc for 4 years off and on. It's been an idea that's been kicked around by actually some pretty high-profile people in Hollywood that had been wanting to make it, and they never got the budget approved through somebody until very recently. So in other words, it was an idea that they kept pushing, and I think it wasn't necessarily in front of everybody's plate of all these people. It was something that they wanted to do. But now that the sort of methane has become much more of a hot topic, especially in the last year or two, it's kind of as it's exponentially been being released, as is the interest for it. So just lately, they actually ended up getting the budget approved, and what they had originally planned to do with it is actually conduct an enormous amount of research rather than shooting, and that's where bulk of that budget was gonna go, because they couldn't get enough of it. It's really hard to get millions of dollars for documentaries that aren't like a hot topic thing that somebody wants to do right now. Like, for example, greenhouse gases. There's been probably thousands of documentaries financed on release of like CO2. But when you say methane, there's some problems with that. It hasn't been on top of everybody's list, even though it is the most ominous thing that's coming out of the whole climate change discussion. That is the one that can just literally wipe everything out really quickly. The second thing is methane has been something that the industry is interested in protecting, like the idea of drilling for methane. So there's actually huge money interest that don't want any documentaries being made on methane. And in fact, some years ago, it was Al Gore that didn't help in this discussion, because when they asked him about what do you think of the methane and how that may play into, because he does all these climate change documentaries, like he's been all over that. So they asked him, like, what do you think about methane? And his response was, we shouldn't talk so much about that because it'll take discussion away from greenhouse gases, which is what my priority is. Well, actually, greenhouse gases are actually much, much slower way to destroy the planet than release of methane in a short amount of time.
Right.
Because greenhouse gases will heat things up, but
methane is like the nuke of
yeah, I mean, methane is
change.
like the giant nuke that could go off. So,
Yeah.
I mean, he's for years been saying, hold off, don't talk about that so much. I mean, unless that becomes like an immediate threat. Well, some people are arguing it is an immediate threat.
Yeah.
So this is a matter of agreement or disagreement. But greenhouse gases has been discussed for 40, 50 years. Methane has been discussed for no years. In fact, in LA last year, there was a giant methane release because there was a methane drilling station somewhere up, I think, like in the valley, that went haywire. They had a drill that exploded down there, and then it cracked, the drill, the whole mine open, and it started releasing. The largest amount of methane ever released in a single spot happened. Did you hear anything in the news about that?
No.
Did you hear that they had to evacuate a whole neighborhood that's next to it because people were choking to death from the methane coming out? And then all that methane seeps into the earth and makes its way into water and all the other things. So in other words, that was a giant disaster, yet nobody's talking about it. Well, there's a reason for that, because there's huge money interests out there that whenever there's a methane issue, they're like, well, shut up about it. So that's one of the reasons why it hasn't been discussed.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And if you start discussing it, it's like a huge problem for some very wealthy people.
Wow. That's I did not know any of this stuff. But
Yeah.
that's an informative thing to talk about. So are you able to talk about where you've traveled over the past?
Yeah, I mean, we're
Okay.
going basically, to sum it up in a general way, we're going to some of the most important spots as it relates to that. So the Arctic is one of them. So we did one
so tell
trip.
us about that experience. I mean, because you just got back this past week, so
Right.
And had you even gone to the Arctic before? Had you gone to any
No.
sub-zero temperature like
No.
this?
No, and actually this year was a special year in the Arctic because it's been overall, on average, about 30 degrees warmer than usual. 30 degrees is a lot. I mean, 3 degrees is concerning
Right.
Yeah.
to a certain extent if it's way out of the norm. But 30 degrees is crazy. So there's something happening in the Arctic, right? And I think that may be one of the reasons why everybody just started going really hardcore towards this idea for this documentary, because they're noticing something even more out of the ordinary than some of the out of the ordinary stuff that's been happening in the Arctic. And when you look at most of the glaciers, they've receded pretty rapidly. And while I was up there, I was chatting with people that would be most knowledgeable about it, which is not so much scientists, but actually guides that have been in the Arctic for 40, 50 years. Some of these guys, like that's been their life, to be guides, to like take people out onto these glaciers and stuff like that. So I talked to them, and they're saying those glaciers have receded like miles in some cases. I mean, they're just gone. Some of those glaciers are almost entirely gone. We already knew this was a problem, right? Because like Glacier National Park used to have, I think, 1,200 glaciers, and now they're down to like 20. So soon there won't be a glacier at Glacier National Park, so they might want to rename it because it's not going to be Glacier.
Lack of Glacier National Park.
Yeah, and when you go to Glacier National Park, there's giant signs in which they're trying to communicate this to people. They're saying the glaciers are gone. So what you're seeing here, you might not be able to see next time you come back. There's actually probably you won't be able to see when you come back next time.
Wow, no kidding.
That's huge, but the Arctic is a big problem because, I mean, all of glaciers melting is a problem, but the Arctic is a huge problem because underneath there is a nuclear bomb.
Right.
So that's the one we can't afford to have disappear because it's the only thing holding it in. Mm-hmm. So if those glaciers were to suddenly, let's say that thing with 30 degrees maintains and that stays the case in the next 4 or 5 years, you could have all those things melt to nothing in a really short amount of time. And then we're all toast.
What's the 30-degree increase? What time span is that over? Like a 10-year?
The winter.
Oh, like
in 1 year.
So like last year it was 30 degrees. Oh, wow, that's insane.
That's insane, right? So that's why
it's like a whole new climate there. Yeah.
So when I was up there, they're all panicking. Some of those people up at the Arctic because they're seeing something they've never seen. Now, they've seen it get bad, but this is like way out there. This is like nobody would have ever anticipated this getting that much warmer. I mean, literally, the temperature hadn't ever in this winter decreased to normal levels.
So you got to tell me what those people are like up there, because it's like
right.
It's you said it was basically either tourists or even locals or even just guides. I mean, what are these people doing up there?
So there's like several different groups up there, but it's small groups.
Yeah.
So there's the miners that are still mining parts of the Arctic, and they're mining, to be specific, coal, because that's why people settled Arctic. That is really the only place in Arctic we have settled. Mm-hmm. If you don't count part of Greenland, which is more like a little station, you know, Greenland has some couple of research stations. The only place on Earth within the Arctic Circle where it's actually people living there seriously is a little bit on the north of Alaska and over in Svalbard in Norway. And Norway is a very accessible way to the Arctic. You can land a plane and have the experience of being in the Arctic. So there's a decent amount of tourists that come every year. It's really primarily like business people. And usually it's like team building or things that they do with their like corporations and stuff like that. Then there's just people coming in because they want to get the sense of the Arctic. So bulk of their industry, whatever's left in the Arctic, in this tiny little town called Longyearbyen, there's been like 6 or 7 towns before, and now they're pretty much all dead except one. It's called Barentsburg. Barentsburg is a mining town that still operates. The last operational major mine in Svalbard is in Barentsburg. It's run by Russians. Russians have almost exclusively run the coal mining in the Arctic since 20s. Prior to that, it was Americans, actually.
So, I mean, you want to go ahead?
What could you run through like quickly what your average day was there?
So we got there and it was pretty shitty weather. A lot to curse on here.
It
was was really messed up weather. So first couple of days we just lost. We couldn't do it. And when I say bad weather there, I should be really specific. All the weather there can be pretty bad
right.
weather.
Yeah.
So that means huge snowfall with giant winds. Mm-hmm. So it makes it really impossible to go around because you have no visibility, and it's really hard to get equipment out and set up and shoot because you're just being pelted by snow from all directions. You're basically just buried in snow really quickly. And that snow falls there for most of the year. I mean, bulk of the year there is snowfall there, and in like higher regions of it, there will be in the summer as well. So we lost those few days. Now, the rest of the days, they were shootable days. You were probably looking at about minus 25 Celsius. So that's roughly around 0 Fahrenheit. Actually, technically, it should be way colder than that.
Right.
That's the point I'm making, that it should actually be so cold in the winter that it almost is unfeasible to go out and do anything. And that's why the months of about, something like November, December into January, sometimes there's very few things happening in that area. Like the guides will show up waiting for an opportunity to take people out in these glaciers and areas with a lot of ice, because those things become unstable now really quickly. Like by the time you get to April, we just entered April.
It's melted, yeah.
It's going to get melted to such an extent that what we just did, which is one of our typical days, was to get on snowmobiles and to just snowmobile across glaciers, because that's pretty much all that's left. The fjords have melted, so you can't cross the fjords. You can't cross water anymore, except in few select spots. So now you have to go across the glaciers, which is almost never a good idea.
Yeah.
Because it's extremely cold. So all the wind that sweeps across them, there's nothing to block the wind. There's no trees. There's nothing, right? It's wasteland. So the wind sweeps, and that wind is like minus 40. Like, so your minus 25 is far worse because the wind is like freezing
the wind chill.
everything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like mentally, how do you prepare for that as far as the cold? I mean, you're just although it seems warm for them, it's still really fucking cold.
Oh, it's cold, way cold.
So how do you deal with that, essentially?
So you put like 6 layers on there. You put 6 layers on top and bottom of your body, and those are polar layers, right? So what you want to do is do a lot of wool, like a merino wool. So you do about 6 or 7 layers, like when you're going out for like serious like expeditions in Canada or something in winter, like when you're walking across giant amounts of land. You want to wear like serious ski boots and like 3 layers of socks, and all those socks are pretty thick socks, so you're barely feeling your feet in there. And you need to, because we had a guy on a crew who wore 3 layers. He decided to go lighter, and he was developing like frostbite on his knees. And that's because you're getting pelted by this wind, and it's freezing everything on your body. So you're developing like layers of ice on your clothes, and that is like a cold piece of ice making your body very cold. So he probably like regretted really quickly like what he did. And I was kind of paranoid when I saw how cold it is. So I just dressed like max. Everything I brought, I put on. But it makes your mobility really hard. So that's the big problem, because you're wearing masks. Yeah. You're wearing multiple layers on your face, so you can only have your eyes, and everything else is covered. So it's like really easy, like hard to breathe. It's hard, so you have to take all that off in order to eat something or to drink something and put it back on, which is annoying. It takes like 10 minutes to take all the layers off and then put them all on. So that's hard. Like basically you have to eat in the morning and then shoot all day and then come back and eat in the evening. So because you cannot just keep taking stuff off.
So how is it? I mean, because you're shooting with your hands, I'm assuming. How is it?
Well, that was the problem. That was the issue, because everything else you can have covered, but you do need your mobility of hands, right? So you can't put giant like gloves
a lot of
and
little buttons you got to be pressing. Yeah.
So I was wearing basically like free hands gloves, So you put several layers of base layers on gloves, and those can be wool or whatever, and then these free hands actually have a couple of fingers that you can just take off and put back on. So that's what I was doing, and of course I was developing frostbite right on my fingers, and I can't feel them at all. Especially this finger, I can't feel at all. It's like it's bad. But
did you have to get treatment for that or no?
I mean, I don't necessarily, and it's going to be just a couple of weeks that it starts kind of coming back to life. But if it started getting swollen, like gotten really bad, like the whole finger, whole hand, then you have to get treatment. I'm just limited to tops of fingers, but obviously I saw people in there that lost like fingers and arms, because like the freezing was so bad that they couldn't recover their like extremities. So they always tell you like your nose is an issue. So our guide, who actually was really well dressed, he still was getting a little bit of frostbite in his nose. He ended up like athletic taping his nose on top of everything else. It's cold.
So did anyone in your part of your crew have anything like really serious happen?
Nothing like horrible, like where they're going to lose a finger. But I mean, they're all probably going to have a little bit of frostbite on their hands, and one of the guys developed a little bit on his knee. Yeah. But it's not going to be like the end of the world kind of thing. He'll get treated and be okay. But
I know you needed gun training as well. Was there much wildlife to where you had to use that weapon at all?
So the big issue there is the bears. The polar bears in particular. So they're much tougher bears than say a black bear, and they're not like the type that you're gonna just scare them by. Yeah. So they like thaw out roughly between mid-March to about mid-April. So we actually got there before they started really waking up, like to the degree they're gonna be like right now. So we didn't like run into any when we were there. We ran into like tracks of bears. We didn't run into any, but we're going to be back in June, and obviously we're going to run into a lot when we're there. But you have to have a gun. So the way that it works is the bear wakes up and only has several things to eat. I mean, it doesn't have a variety. This isn't like a bear waking up in the Smoky Mountains, like where you can eat like thousands of different things, including like stuff off of trees and whatever, like honey or whatever they end up going after. In the Arctic, when it wakes up, the only thing you can eat is fish, which is not easy for it to catch because it needs to be near ocean water, which sometimes isn't exposed, or floating on a piece of ice. It's not easy for them to get it. Access to water is difficult in the Arctic. The second thing is that they can eat the deer. And the deer, knowing where the bears are, don't hang out near water exactly all the time. And then Arctic foxes, which are hard and like few and far between, and a couple of other animals that live there, maybe like birds if you can catch it. So there's very few things for bear to eat. And there's like 6,000 bears on the island.
So they're all hungry.
They're all hungry and they're looking to eat anything. So if it sees you, it's like it's either eating you or it's death. So you run into two types of bears. One is that it's a bear that'll gauge like how dangerous you are or not. And when you're on a snowmobile, you look much more formidable than you are by yourself, because the snowmobile, it reads it and you as one, like one unit. So when it looks at it, it's like big.
Yeah.
So it's going almost against something that's as big as it, and it's revving really loudly. So it's making it look like a really angry animal. So some of these bears will then read that as a threat and then like make a decision whether to go forward or not. And then if they do, you can actually shoot them pretty much with a flare gun, which is like a big fireball that explodes in their face, but it doesn't hurt them, it doesn't kill them. What it does is scares them potentially. So that's typically those two are the way you get rid of a bear. But there's also bears that wake up and they're just so hungry they don't give a shit like how loud you are on what you throw in their face. At that point you got to kill them. The problem is like unless you can get away. Wow. The issue with that is if you kill a bear in Svalbard, actually, for that matter, if you kill a polar bear anywhere, because they're protected no matter where you go, like the Norwegian government will just straight up bankrupt you over that. Like even though they know you were saving your life, the way they look at it is you went into it.
Yeah, you shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Yeah, you went into its territory and you didn't take enough steps to protect yourself and to avoid killing a bear. So a few people that do kill a bear, and I think they have about 5-6 bears that die a year, because somebody shoots them. Actually, mass majority don't die because people that shoot them don't shoot them to death. Like they shoot them, they injure them, and then they usually get eaten because the bear gets 3 times as pissed off. Because now it's an injured animal. So yeah, I mean, if you kill it, they'll just look at the case and say, "Hey, you guys didn't do what you were supposed to do," and then they'll bankrupt you. They'll like straight up give you so many fines that there's no way you're going to be able to pay them. And that's what happens with people that shoot bears. So it's like they always tell you when you get up there, whatever you do, don't kill a bear. It's like the absolute last thing. If it literally is your life and then you have to do it. But you should take every precaution not to have to do it.
So, I mean, do they give you like an elephant gun? How do you? Because you can't just.
Yeah, you're not going to kill it with a handgun. So these are rifles, which have bullets which would probably pierce an elephant.
Yeah.
I guess the Revenant didn't take those precautions. He got attacked by the bear immediately.
And also his bear, you can maybe take on with bare hands, a black bear.
Yeah.
There's never been a person that's been able to even threaten a polar bear, much less kill one. And polar bear arguably could take a grizzly out. That's how tough these animals are.
So what was your primary job on this project? What is it in general right now?
So mine is director of photography, cinematographer.
Okay.
So their interest was to not do it as a straight talking heads documentary. Like we'll still record a bunch of that, but the idea is to have a kind of a general narrator. It's actually really mostly from their point of view. So think of it like the Al Gore situation, where it's really from his point of view the way that the dog goes. This is really rooted from point of view, except the point of view is actually quite dark. It's from a person that has a very sort of draconian view of what this all means. And so that'll kind of color everything that they do. And what they want is to kind of be in his head for the doc. So in other words, things that we shoot are going to be...
in the viewer's head.
In the viewer's head, kind of out of the mind of this person. Okay. So it's going to be pretty dark kind of a documentary. So what they wanted is to avoid typical doc stuff. So they like time lapse, and they went a lot of time lapse, or just sort of go and shoot interesting video, but not like a bunch of talking heads. So we'll see how that'll turn out at the end, because you kind of never know with these things, and people change their minds. But we're going to give them so much footage that they're going to be able to cut it no matter how they want to do it.
I also want to ask you about your story. You told us a funny story in class about how you were on ice, essentially walking, and your boat got stuck. So describe that overall process as to what happens and why they have to stop.
So we took one of these boats. It was entering one of the fjords, and the fjord it entered, which was about 50 miles north of the town where we were staying. That fjord ended up freezing at the top end of it. So when the boat entered there, I think they thought that they're gonna be able to crack through ice until they get to the docks, but they couldn't. Like, the ice got too thick. So basically, at some point, they just got stuck in it. So when they did that, we were close enough that we could walk to where we were going. So they said, let's step down and walk. And what they did is they took out a ladder and they put it right on that ice, and that ice is next to where the ocean is just coming through.
My God.
So it looked so sketchy. So they're like, "Oh yeah, go down." I'm like, with the equipment, with 70 pounds on me, and they're like, "Oh yeah, come down." So I did, and then there's this Russian guide there, and so I asked him how stable is ice? What's the stability? And he's like, "I don't know. How should I know?" It's like, "Let's walk," and it's 2 miles.
Oh my God.
On it. So yeah, and then but it didn't hit me until I got till the end, and then I was like, wow, we're gonna have to go back. We're gonna have to retrace our, and that's gonna be after a day of sun, because we're gonna have to go back in the evening. It's gonna be melted more. So I was like, ugh. So yeah, that sucked, but it was an interesting experience too, because that's a very Arctic experience, when your boat just gets basically docked in ice,
right.
And then you get off it and you walk in, and that's what we're gonna face this summer. Pretty much all summer, because we're going to be on a vessel that'll take us to all these places, far north of there, and then we're going to be docking into ice basically and getting off. So that was a little taste.
That's incredible.
So would you say that was your closest call as far as danger wise, or
actually flipping snowmobiles on glacier a couple of times was probably closest call, and we just happened to fall in a good way.
Oh yeah,
because you can flip and break your neck. You can also flip and land your face onto the sledges where we carried thousands of pounds of equipment in the back, and they'll just kill you. So we just got lucky that when we flipped, we didn't flip into something sharp or into something hard.
How fast were the snowmobiles going?
Usually you go about 25 miles an hour to about 35 miles an hour.
Okay, so
and what an opportunity for a filmmaker to do just that. I mean, it really. I mean, you said yourself you don't commend anybody to do it again, but. I mean, you said it was it's just become a good opportunity. So compared to where you started before, how you wanted to be a director, starting at UCLA and then going to American Film Institute, what made you decide to take that avenue?
Well, because I never was. I mean, a lot of people I went to school with, they were very tunnel vision people. Basically, they had tunnel vision about what they want to do in life. So when they went to that school, they were like, "Well, I'm going there to be a feature film director to make fiction films." Bulk of people had this kind of tunnel vision to them, and actually that's probably the reason why bulk of them, really vast majority of them, ended up bolting out of LA and ended up quitting on the industries, because they had this tunnel vision without even understanding what the right path should be for them, and they believe that there's some kind of an authority that needs to give them permission to do this sort of stuff. If that makes sense, right? Because there's this authoritative industry that'll somehow give them an opportunity to do that. That's crazy, because when you look at the amount of movies that get made, there's a handful of people that actually get to make movies. So the idea that you're going to focus on that and make that your life's meaning is silly, right? So I never had that. I mean, I was trained as a filmmaker, but the way I looked at it was, if I have a project that needs these sets of things, that's what I'm going to pursue. So if my project is a good stills project, I'm going to do stills. If my project is a good video project, if my project is a good time-lapse project, if my project is just a written project, that's what I was going to pursue. So I never had that sort of tunnel vision. So when I got my education, it was never with one particular and only goal in mind. When I got it, it enabled me to do certain things. So in other words, when I decided to then take on different other sort of pursuits, like portraits of people, which is a big interest for me, and in particular nonfiction type stuff. You call them nonfiction, but nature, shooting nature, right? So when I started getting a lot of those opportunities, I was like, well, I like that. I'm spending time in places that I like, and I'm doing things that I enjoy. So it was all part of somebody else's maybe grand plan for me, because it was the opportunities that came my way, not always necessarily because I made decisions that led to that.
So when you did the film in the Name of the Sun, which, by the way, for those who are listening, he directed a film for American Film Institute, and I guess is it like your thesis for it?
Yeah.
Okay. And I would recommend you go check it out. I've seen it a few times. It's a great film. But at that point, did you have the tunnel vision?
No, not as much.
Okay.
Like I still want to go back and do fiction films. That'll happen. But to me, it's like, do I have a project that I really have to do? Mm-hmm. So at that time, I was actually already mired in a stills project that I was working on. And at that time, it was like a side thing. That ended up growing because as I kept doing it, all these opportunities kept coming. So like I never intended, say, to shoot for Vogue Italy, but I ended up published there.
Wow.
Which is weird, right?
Yeah.
Because there's these people that are part of that industry, and that's all they want in life. They have like a tunnel vision to be published.
That's
by these
their
people.
Oscar win.
Yeah. It's like their Oscar win. And then I start getting published without actually bargaining for it. So I was like, well, something is telling me that this is going in a good direction. So I kept doing it, and that led to like TED Talks and all sorts of other shit.
Yeah.
But if I'd kept the tunnel vision, that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't have pursued that enough. So I listened to what sort of the ether was telling me.
And this eventually led to Skyglow, which I want to go in depth about that as well, as far as like what was your primary goal to promote this sort of work? And because that's why they essentially hired you for this next project, is for your time lapses. So if you could give us some detail as to what Skyglow is and what you're promoting towards it.
So when I was on this like many multi-year portrait-oriented project in which I shot like 2,000 people, not with a gun, but with a camera. So as I was doing that, we had actually quite a bit of nights to ourselves when I would be going somewhere, because we were often in like very rural areas, very sort of middle of nowhere places. So I ended up doing some like astrophotography. You called hack astrophotography as a hobby thing, like because it was there, so why not shoot it? I had the equipment, and it was interesting. Like as soon as I had like a 5D Mark III. What I noticed about that camera is what great results it was giving you for night photography, just night shooting, low light shooting, I should be specific. So then I was like, hey, why don't I shoot some stars with these cameras? Like, it's almost stupid not to, like, because I can finally do that. Like, that's a thing you couldn't do 10 years before. So when I started doing that, it was a fun thing to do, and I kept doing it, and I kept posting some of it. And then a friend of mine, Gavin, out of LA, noticed some of that, and I was noticing something he was doing, which he was shooting a lot of what you call astro time lapse, like night sky stars time lapses. So we were doing basically essentially the same thing. He was just animated in the stills. And so I started talking to him about what he was doing, why he was doing it, and invited him to come over so we can cross southwest a little bit and do some photography in areas that he hadn't gone to. And these are very dark areas, like dark sky, super dark sky areas. Especially the Colorado Plateau is one of the best probably in the country, like especially parts of Utah and Arizona and Colorado and New Mexico. So we decided to go, and we visited a few spots, and we started shooting. And then we started talking a little bit, and I said, what is the goal for you with all these videos that you're making? And he said, well, I want to, this is like a way to keep it fresh and interesting and do something creative, because he was mired in doing a lot of screenwriting at the time. So, and he's more of a director than he's a screenwriter in many ways. Like his background is in directing. He likes to work with visuals. So it was a way for him to keep creative and do something fun and do something in the video realm. So I told him, but you're doing something interesting and you're getting a lot of views on what you're doing. I mean, some of the videos he was doing, they were getting like 1 million views.
Wow.
So I was like, there's got to be something more than that. Like when you're getting this much attention, you got to take it to some next step. So we just started talking. I was like, let's pitch some ideas, because I'm doing a bunch of stills and you're doing a bunch of videos. Is there a way that we can make this work into some kind of a large-scale project? And so one of the most obvious things that came to mind is that if you're going to do astrophotography, you're actually limited as to where you can do it by the nature of a problem that we face in society, which is that we use a lot of lights and we blast them out
light
of the sky.
pollution. Yeah.
Light pollution is huge, right? And in Flagstaff, we know about it because Flagstaff is what you call the first international dark sky town. This town is, historically speaking, and put it in historical context, been most dark sky aware of any place on Earth. Like no other place on Earth can take more credit, because Flagstaff was the first town in 1958 to get a lightning ordinance in order to protect its night observation because of the two observatories in town, like Lowell and the Navy Observatory.
Yeah.
And the reason why that happened is because the American government came and strong-armed people in Flagstaff, which didn't want to change their lighting systems to do it. Because they said it was a matter of national security. So they literally like forced the town council of Flagstaff to comply. Except in doing so, ever since, people have gained some understanding that this may be a resource worth protecting. So as much as people didn't want to deal with it in the beginning, now they're much more aware and much more supportive of it. With that being said, the problem of light pollution is a problem of civilization, because no matter where civilization is gone, light pollution has been an issue. And this goes back to even when in European cities, like when they had blowtorches being put out on the streets, you had a lot of, because if you're standing next to a giant burning fire, you're not seeing the night sky. You have to step away from it, right? So then that turned into gas lamps, and then gas lamps turned into electricity, which was the most efficient and quickest way to deliver light. And then suddenly people started believing where there's light, there's civilization. It's like a thing that we linked. Except that nobody ever thought about what do we lose in that process. Yeah. There has not been enough study or enough thought in that. Very few people in the process were stopped and said, wait a second, we're losing something by doing this. All that we saw, and the East Coast is a good example of this. I mean, it was the first place, East Coast of America was the first place where electricity spread like wildfire within the context of the world. And what you saw is expansion of people as well. And suddenly these small towns became viable. Like you can even live in horrible places because you had access to electricity and all these sort of things. Like, do you want to live in the Arctic? It's a lot easier when you have electricity. It's like one of those things. Mm-hmm. So what had happened is that there was a kind of a sprawl. Like people had spread, and as they spread, the light spread. And suddenly all of East Coast of America is gone. And when I say by gone, it's all light polluted, and mostly really heavily light polluted. So now there's only like few spots here and there where you can actually go and see the Milky Way. And there's only few where you can do that. So now people are losing like sense of that even exists. So when they see a lot of these videos, and hence Gavin's videos were getting attention, is they were looking at them and like, what is that?
Yeah.
You know, is that
they
animated?
Think it's fake or something.
Yeah, is the Milky Way fake?
Yeah.
And it's like, no, it's actually there, you know? So the story that we, came across, and it's actually what opens the book that we did, was a story that happened in LA during the Northridge earthquake, which took out the LA's power grid. Like it just nuked it basically. So people had to run out because it was a huge earthquake. So the first thing you should do is you should either go under your door or go outside. So a lot of people ran outside. So when they ran outside, they looked up and suddenly there's like stars and there's like a Milky Way there. And of course, it took them by surprise, and suddenly, like 911 in LA started getting phone calls, like weird shit in the sky.
Aliens are coming.
Are coming. And they're like, no, it's just stars. No, it's not. Like it's like we've never seen this. It's out of the ordinary. Like, what's the big shimmering thing in the sky? So people were like freaking out, and so at that time, like there was a lot of people that started talking about this. Like there was, like in LA area, suddenly like. Griffith Observatory, which was like an observatory rendered useless by light pollution. That's another really good story, just as a side story, which was this guy called Griffith J. Griffith. There was a soldier that owned lots of land in LA area, and he owned this place that we call now Griffith Park. He like owned all that land. So he gave it to the city, and he gave a lot of his own money so a Griffith Park Observatory would be built, like named after him. And his idea was that citizens of LA, and LA is a much smaller town back then. LA was just a couple of little villages, that they would be able to then come up to the observatory and be able to use the observatory to see like different things. And his idea was to make like astronomy like democratic, like accessible to people, because people couldn't get access to like Lowell Observatory, which existed at that time.
Consumer astronomy, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
So he wanted like children to go there and like families to go there. Except like when he designed it to be built and wanted it to be built, that was like turn of the century. By the time it was built in 1935, by that time it's gone. Because the difference that happened in the meantime, they went from gas lamps to just light everywhere. And before he died, he would have seen, right before he died, 1919 is when he died, he would have seen all these light poles come up everywhere. And there's no way he would have not have known that this was going to make an impact. He was an amateur astronomer. And he was an amateur astronomer because he didn't have money to do that. Like he could own his own telescope and stuff like that. Like, so he wanted to democratize that. He wanted to give an opportunity to people to have that kind of an experience. But it was gone. Like, so by the time they built it, gone. But it's really Northridge that kind of launched something for Griffith Observatory, because the head of Griffith Observatory was getting phone calls as well. being asked what are those things and so on. So he then started devising different programs in the observatory to talk about light pollution, to really drive this idea. Except LA, of course, as you know, is never going to get rid of it. And they retrofitted all their lights in the wrong way. They went from like sodium vapor to LED, which is bad.
Right.
You go from like yellow light to white light, which actually makes things worse.
Right.
And those LEDs, they're more energy efficient, but they're brighter.
Right.
Way brighter and more fucked
Yeah.
up. So for us, we knew this was a problem. We were living in LA like all these years. I mean, I still live in LA because I have to commute. But LA is a mess. And actually, historically speaking, it is probably the worst light polluter across the century. Now there's towns that are worse, right? Because now there's Hong Kong, which is worse, it's like certifiably worse. But if you look at the last 100 years, LA was the first town to get lights built like way out from the city as well, because they built them basically from LA to Palm Springs. Right? I mean, it's a huge amount of land. I mean, when you look at how much light LA made available like across this whole area, they were trying to connect little villages, and in process of doing so, they built highways and lights. And suddenly these lights just killed everything, like pretty much from Mexican border all the way to like San Luis Obispo. It's just gone.
Yeah, I mean, we're from Orange County,
Right,
from
so
SoCal,
you
and
would
like,
know, yeah.
I started taking astrophotography shots in SoCal, and I'm like, there's like no stars out.
No.
And then I come here and I start doing it. I'm like, this is amazing. This is like best case scenario here. Yeah.
Because Flagstaff has enabled a town of 100,000 people to see stars in the city, which is amazing.
With your naked eye.
Yeah,
Like, yeah.
there's no place like that on Earth.
Yeah.
That's a developed place. And then you can drive from Flagstaff in 15 minutes, be at the darkest possible spot, like a Wupaki.
Yeah, we went to Grand Falls the last week or something, and
Exactly.
it was I got some like
Incredible
gorgeous
shots.
photos, just insane. Yeah.
And I guess since that's such a driving problem of light pollution that nobody really talks about, is that what led to the success of the Kickstarter? I mean, because it did get a good amount of revenue for what...
Yeah, and I think we could have gotten more.
Wow.
I think we were more conservative with what we wanted.
It was
not super
70,000?
conservative. Yeah.
70,000, and you ended up with 73,000.
The reason why I say that we could have gotten more, I had run 2 Kickstarters prior to that, and I ran them for a fine art project. I mean, granted, it was a fine art project that was present in the media in different places. But so in other words, there was already a fan base for it. So then I could turn to those people and I said, hey, originally I said, can I get it for $35,000? Well, I was able to in 2 times that I ran it. Well, this we knew was going to take more because we need to finance trips to all these places and try to capture all these things. So we knew it was going to be more expensive, more complicated. But with that being said, a couple of things we thought were going our way. Number one is there was an increase of interest in this. Like all these videos were getting a lot of views. There was still going to be a lot of work that needed to be done, but there was definitely a lot of interest out there. What I didn't know is the extent of that interest, because that we could have asked for 200,000 and conceivably gotten it. Because what I originally thought was that what we're going to get is bulk of it. It was going to be amateur astronomers and people that are aware of the issue. Because once we decided what project to work on, we said we need to center it or anchor it around something. So light pollution was going to be it, except we wanted to discuss it from a historical standpoint to understand the nuts and bolts of it and also what to do about it, right?
Yeah.
So a 3-pronged kind of an approach. And the videos were a way to suck people into the visual world of that. But then the book and all the talks we do and all the other materials that we develop would be a way to educate beyond that. So the videos were doing the work already. We didn't have to work so hard on that front. But what I didn't know is the amount of interest out there. So I didn't know, for example, there was going to be a bulk of people that will support us that are like uber religious people. like we had one guy that dropped like $500, who was like a priest, a priest. He has like a designation in his name, like a Catholic priest, and he gave us like all this money. And I like talked to the guy, and he's like, "No, I see God. Like to me, night sky is God." Okay, so we have a huge amount of people that support the project because to them it's important to fight against light pollution because they see that as a religious.
Yeah. So it's like everyone had their own personal reasons for wanting to do it.
So I had no idea that these would be the people because in my mind there was the religious people, if anything, going to come after us a little bit because bulk of them are tied to like the conservative movement, and a lot of them are like pro-business, pro-pollution almost people, which to me is just bizarre.
So after that point, did BBC Earth eventually just pick it up and see?
We were in bed with BBC Earth before we did that.
Okay.
Because BBC Earth came when we started working these joint videos, me and him. Then BBC Earth came and said, we'd like to commission. I think originally they said like 12 videos. Yeah, to do something
Okay.
like that, some number like that. And they said, "Can you guys do 3 for us to start, at the very least?" Because we couldn't have done 12. There was no way for us to do 12 videos like in a few months.
Yeah.
So we decided to work on that and kind of working with them, and we did a few other videos. We did one that was specifically for Time Magazine and then like Nat Geo. We saw that there was a giant interest. All these people were interested in it. They were getting a lot of hits, a lot of views, and what we usually were getting out of Vimeo, they wanted to steal some of that in order to drive traffic to their sites because they saw the drive was there. There were people looking at it. So all of them just gave us an idea that we need to do more and we need to take this further, right? Because all those places were an outlet for us to sell an idea of some sort because we were just sending images that we're not doing enough. That was my opinion. And frankly, I don't want to do any project large scale without an idea that anchors it because otherwise you're wasting your time. So in other words, all these astrophotographers that are out there, there's some really good people. There's some people that are way better than me. They're going to be way better than me because they put their heart and soul into technical execution of these things. I don't got time for that. We need to cover 150,000 miles.
Right.
I don't got time to sit there to find the perfect moment to shoot. I deal with what I got. Well, there's people that live at a place in order to take the perfect photograph. That's great. That's fine. But if all they do is take a bunch of perfect photographs...
It's just pretty. It's not.
Just pretty.
There's no story.
There's nothing there. And in fact, I remember one really distinct interview we did, which was with the head of... Wired magazine, like Wired magazine's like digital division. So he was like, I want to interview you guys and it's going to be for this thing. And he's like, I'll tell you guys why I want to interview you. He was like so adamant about it. He said, I see these videos all the time, like the shit that you guys are putting out. And he's like, I see a lot of these photos, they suck. I don't care. Like there's no story. He's like, the reason why I want to talk to you is because you have some ideas associated with it.
Yeah.
Now we can actually talk. So images, that means nothing. That's
Right.
literally like candy. Now
Yeah.
we're talking about what is the substance. So the substance
Right.
is, can we... And like it's called zeitgeist of like dark sky movement. Can we actually make impact
Right.
with it? So forget images. The images are only as useful
Just shows
as
you're
they're
technically
used.
good at what you're doing.
And
right.
so what?
Yeah.
I mean, there's this dude out there called Michael Scheinblum, right? Who was one of the astrophotographers. He's got something like 500,000 followers. But where's his actual presence?
Right.
He's got all these great images, but it's like, who is he?
It's like you're just scrolling past, you're like, that's cool, like it, and then keep scrolling. Like it doesn't, you don't stop and think about whatever it is. Yeah.
No. I mean, he in fact is as good as he's doing by doing the astrophotography. He's actually somewhat like setting it back by portraying it as beautiful images,
Right.
but not funneling the people that are enjoying those images to something useful.
So in retrospect, it's not all about what the prettiest photo is. It's
No.
about whatever concept you're trying to pull.
story.
The story.
The story, because
essentially.
if you can have a story associated with the image, now there's depth to it. Like
Yeah.
if you have images of like Civil War cannons and all that cool stuff and night skies juxtaposed to that, it's an interesting image. You can look at it. You can say there's a kind of a story in the image itself.
Yeah.
But when you start hearing about why that's relevant, then it gets better, right? Because the main song that was developed during the Civil War called Taps, which is still used now during military funerals, but it was developed as a call to go to sleep. Well, if you look at what the song is, if you look at the lyrics, it's actually an ode to night sky. Like the literal ode to night sky, because to
Yeah.
them that was important. Like soldiers, to them it had a meaning because night sky was a way of contemplation. It was a way to end a really fucked up day.
And it's cool just seeing the different environments that you put onto screen because, I mean, you don't even really expect there to be a night sky at that point, or even just like a beautiful cloud time lapse and rain passing over. It just, it does essentially tell the story of what happens in that day.
Right.
And I think that's just something that's kind of baffling that people don't do nowadays. Not as often as what I'm thinking. It's just from my experience.
Right.
But
Because they look at it shallowly. I think that's what it is.
It's a surface level kind
It's
of
a
thing.
very
Yeah.
surface level thing because, and I mean, you're part of a storytelling program, so you would get it more. You two guys would get it more because you're being taught, hopefully, if we're doing our jobs right, is to think of images as a storytelling device.
To analyze it, yeah.
To analyze it. They have depth in images, to attempt to do more than just shoot an image. You can light something very beautifully, but what does that matter?
Right.
Right? So that's why I think like that's the thing to be stressed. So when we started doing this, I immediately went to Gavin and I said, we have to make a story out of it. It's not just the stories of the little videos and some images. We have to have a mission behind it. And he was like, of course, like we're not going to go beyond like if we don't, right? So that's what the Kickstarter was. Kickstarter was a way to turn to the people and say, hey, are you guys interested in this? and can we do something about this thing? So, and then, hey, we got all the support. And I think we could have gotten more.
Do you and Gavin have specific job titles held to one another?
No, because we do the
Or do you
same
guys
thing.
both just shooters and editors? And you
We're
just
shooters and editors, and we do, and of course we do writing. You know, I mean, I did pretty much bulk of the writing for the book because it was my sort of background. I've done books before. So when you read the book, you'll notice most of the stuff I did. And it was part of the research, and it was part of the anecdotes and all these kind of cool things we wanted to throw in there. So everything from kind of facts to stuff that kids would almost be interested in, like those kind of facts. And then also just stories, like actually stories rooted in the celestial observation that kind of tell you a kind of a story of night skies through time. You know, what did night sky mean at the beginning? What does night sky mean now? Why is night sky a relevant thing? What does the night sky mean to like us physically, emotionally, spiritually, in all those levels? You want to address all that. So we try to do that through the book. Mm-hmm. And we both do the work of actually getting the materials and try to get the materials that actually tell a story.
Wow.
So what do you think is like the end game for this project? Where does it, you know?
The end game is an educational franchise of a way of a dark sky. So in other words, to something that we can push in various different ways as ways of getting people in tune with this idea of night skies, and also that they can do something about them not being around. So
Right.
light pollution is an easiest one to solve because a Northridge earthquake solved it in LA.
Yeah.
Whereas
Just turn off your lights.
Just turn off the lights.
Yeah.
Now, there's this guy here who heads the, I think, Coconino Astronomers Association. And we were just joking around and chatting about this whole thing. And he says, you know, I'm from Jersey, and we in Jersey have simple solutions to issues like light pollution. It's just a well-placed backhoe. And I was like, that's kind of illegal. And that, no, we do that on the weekend. So I think, like, you know, that light pollution is one that we can make an easy, immediate impact on, because if everybody was aware of it,
Right.
and they just made changes to their house, we would cut 90% of it.
It's not a permanent problem where it's like you can't reverse it. It's just turn your lights off.
Nope. And by doing it, you actually save money and you save the global warming problem, because by electricity you're expanding is coming from coal mostly, or from nuclear facilities, which are none of them are very good for you.
So I guess I kind of want to halt a bit, because this ended up bringing you to Flagstaff.
Right.
Is essentially, right? I mean, like, what made you decide to become a professor? Did that avenue just open up as well?
No, I mean, it was one of those things where, like I said that before, like when you're not tunnel visioned on something, there's interesting opportunities that come along the way. So when I was doing a lot of the night sky stuff, there was like a professor out of NAU that had gotten interested in my portraiture stuff that I was doing before, Sam Minkler. Right, in photo. So he contacted me by email and he said, hey, I'd love to meet up in LA. If I'm in LA, or if you're anywhere near Grand Canyon, please let me know. I live in Flagstaff. So I actually saved kind of saved that in the back of my mind, you know, that he contacted me. So when I was going out to Grand Canyon, I actually ended up phoning him, and I was like, remember, like, we exchanged some emails, and you want to meet up? He's like, oh yeah, man. He's got a way of talking, like he's a Navajo, Sam Inkler. He's got like a way of talking, and he says, no, come down to Flagstaff. Come, let's have a breakfast. Let's do this. Come in the morning. So I showed up, and then he like texts me like 5 minutes before. He's like, "No, come to NAU. I'm a professor at NAU. I want to show you."
He's kind of leading you in there.
Yeah, I want to show you the campus.
All right, just sign this contract real quick.
and then I ended up like going in there, and suddenly I end up in a classroom, and he's like teaching his first day of like summer school, and he's like, "Class, welcome. We got a guest speaker." I was like, "What the fuck?" He totally led me on. But then he says like, "Talk about something. Talk about something." So I was like, "What am I going to talk about?" And he goes, talk about exposure, just talk about something. So I ended up talking about it, and then I noticed something else that was weird that was going on. Like, I looked at it, and there was a bunch of other professors there. I was like, what the fuck is going on? And then they come up and they're like, why don't you apply to this position that we have? And at that time I didn't consider that to do at all. I was busy with all the other shit I had to do. But they couldn't get much applicants because they were struggling to fill both photo and film at once. They could find film applicants or photo applicants, but they couldn't find film photo applicants. So they were struggling to fill this position. So anyway, so I went to lunch with Sam, and then Sam goes in like a really interesting story. He goes, he tells me about his like background, about how, you know, when he was a kid, he was kidnapped out of his house, it was taken because, they used to take Native American children right out of their house at a certain age and take them thousands of miles away so they can be educated, quote unquote, in a boarding school.
Western
education, boarding school.
Yeah.
So what they would do to them is they would forbid them to wear the clothes that they wore. They forbid them to do any religious rites, and they forbid them to use their name. So they would give them an Anglo name. So he went through some really rough shit, and he couldn't see his family for 15 years. And by the time he went back, half his family was dead at that point. So he had rough upbringing, to say the least. And then when he came back, he was a kind of a gangbanger, getting in trouble and all that sort of stuff. And then eventually he became an apprentice in downtown Flagstaff to a photographer, and he credits it to kind of saving his situation because he focused all those energies to being a photographer, which in many ways we can all take credit for. As artists, I think if we didn't do that, we'd probably do something self-destructive. But anyway, so he tells me this story, which was fascinating. And he says, for me, the success was to be successful in a white institution, because he calls the education institution like any other a white institution. But he says, let me tell you about the applicants we got for this position. He says there was one guy out of China, and there was one guy out of LA, one guy out of New York. And he says, they're just, they're all so boring. They're all so clean. Use the word clean. And he always takes a beat between all those, there's a thought behind every single thing he says. And he goes they're all so Disney. Their stuff is clean. So
pumpkin spice latte.
Yeah, pumpkin spice latte, like I like to say, pumpkin spice latte. And then he goes they're so white. And I was I just cracked up so hard. We're in a restaurant and all these people are around us listening in, what is he talking about? And so I was the Chinese guy is real white, and he's hell yeah, he's white. And Sam goes, so I was I'm from Europe. Of those three guys, I'm closest to white.
Yeah.
Of the three. And he's no, you're not white. And I was what do you mean, Sam? And he's you're not white. And I know that for a fact. And he's how do you know that? But he says, I looked at your photographs. And he says, I look at the way you shoot the land. Forget the people, the land. So I was okay, the land. And he goes, you love the land. He goes to me. And I say, yeah, I love the land. He's you're not white. I was okay. He's white don't love the land. White see the land and want to change the land. They don't like it. Now talk about them wanting to put a gondola into Grand Canyon, no clear case for his argument. And then he goes, yeah, the Chinese guy is white because whiteness is a state of mind and not a state of skin. I was wow, you fucking blow me away. And what I loved about it is that he was actually arguing for me to apply for this position, to be at NAU, despite being absolutely tormented by white people in his lifetime. So I was if this dude is willing to back a white person and think that this is an important thing to have at his school and not a minority, I thought that this is an important thing to consider.
Yeah.
And no other person at NAU could have sold it to me because I had no interest in it. None.
Wow.
Had you heard of NAU before that?
No.
That's incredible.
No, and when he told me that, I was I cannot tell this guy no. I can at the very least apply and then make a decision what to do. If they were to accept me, because I was never part of the this world. I had no interest to be a professor. These are career people that are at most institutions. They're there to do research. They're there to be professors. And I'm I don't give a shit about
this. Was their tunnel vision when they were, that
was their tunnel vision. For me, that's not important. For me, it's creating things, to do art stuff.
Well, thankfully, we were able to get you. At this time, because you have such expertise in all fields. So, whether you wanted to do it or not, it's good that you at least took that avenue.
Well, what I did is I said, look, because this guy was so convincing to me, because he was so speaking out of his heart, that I was I'm going to give it a chance. So when I gave it a chance, they could cater the schedules to my situation, right? Because the position was eventually made the professor practice, which means that I can go and practice. I'm not forced to do research. I'm not forced to be sitting in an institution 24/7. So to them, they wanted me to go out and do my stuff and then come back and talk about it. That was the bulk of what they wanted me to do. So that ended up working out really well that way. And then it didn't consume a lot of my time. So I thought at some point that this can be useful, that there's people that I can make an impact with. And one place that I know I made an impact with is night sky stuff.
Yeah.
Tangibly so.
Wow. Have you thought about starting a night sky type of class?
We have one.
Oh, we do?
Yeah, it's called scientific photography.
Oh, I didn't know.
I created it because I thought it was important, and it deals with astrophotography and time lapse and things like aerial photography and macro, micro. So
What from your experience overall, what advice would you give to aspiring filmmakers thus far that are in our shoes, I guess?
Well, not to be tunnel visioned, and to actually find stories that they can tell for relatively little money, and then just get them funded. Because now there's this thing called crowdfunding, right?
Yeah.
And if you're not taking advantage of it, I think you're a fool. And the only people, you're a fool of some sort, or you're just arrogant. Because I know there's a lot of people out there whose attitude is, I'm not going to do crowdfunding because it makes me look like I'm begging for money on the internet. And I just think that's idiotic. Because here's the way I look at it. You need $100,000 to make a movie. So your argument is, I need to then convince somebody who's quote unquote some kind of an authority figure to give you $100,000, which is probably not going to happen at this day and age. Or, and then if I do that, everything is fine. And if I asked for the people on the internet, just people, no difference between this person or that person. There's no difference between a film producer and a nobody, quote unquote, like they like to say in Hollywood. There's like a bunch of nobodies out there. There's no difference. There's another person that's going to give you money. So if you can get all these people to give you $100,000, what's dirty about that or wrong about that? There's nothing.
And not only that, but the people that are donating are also going to be people that want to watch whatever you're creating. And so you've already got an audience. You know
Instant
you have the audience.
Fan base.
Right,
exactly. And they're also proving to you that your product sells immediately. I mean, it's good on so many levels. Yet you have these idiots who are like, no, but to me it means something to get it accomplished in the official channels. No, you're an idiot. And that's probably why you're going to quit and go home. Yeah. Probably, eventually.
Right. And when people have money, when they donate stuff, they want it to see it finished because they're like, well, I just paid for you to do this, so now, I want you to complete it.
And also, when somebody gives you $100,000, they own the product.
Right, yeah.
And when crowdfunders give you $100,000, you own the product.
Yeah.
So that's another one where how can you possibly make an argument that somebody else owning the product is a better idea?
Right.
Like, that is just so stupid.
Yeah.
In both of the ways, you're not paying money. So the question is, do you own it or you don't own it?
Right.
People are just nothing between the ears.
Well, just because it's so, the system is in place and that, they don't want to, it's like, it's... The structure is there.
It's an ego as well thing, because to them they feel like if we are recognized by some sort of a major company, then somehow that has a meaning.
It's like we've made it.
And that is so stupid. Like, I was doing my own thing and I got recognized by some major companies. In fact, by some companies that some other photographers in town are like, fuck you. How'd you get in there? Who are your contacts? I'm like, well, no, I didn't go and suck anybody's dick to get into these places. They just liked some stuff I was doing and it was timely, because I always try to make something timely.
Yeah.
So it's just that simple. So in other words, don't be stupid. Like, just focus on the opportunities you have. And the opportunities are people you have around you, people you can team up with to work. Your opportunities are like ideas that you're surrounded by that you need to take advantage of, tap into, that are important, that are immediate, that are pressing. Those are like things that are there. Like, if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss them and you're not going to go anywhere. I mean, I think most people live in the past. Like, they have this idea of how things are. And I'm sorry, this fiction, filmmaking, director thing is 70 years old.
Yeah.
We live in a different world now. We live in a world where you can be those whitest kids people and go and make a bunch of shit as undergrads, right? In where were they? Charlottesville. And they started making these things. They started earning crazy money on YouTube. Eventually, they were getting dollar for dollar, dollar per view. I'm like, are you nuts?
And now they have an FX show. So it's like,
and the one that they argued the contract for to be so favorable to them that FX gets very little money out of it.
Yeah, and now I think I saw they're writing a script for a feature-length movie now that they're going to be doing. So
exactly.
It's just like,
But that tells you they are a great lesson, because what they tell you is that you have the power.
Right. And I mean, the internet is basically the ultimate distribution platform. You don't really need anything else at this point. So.
And don't take it for granted, because it might not be around in its current form for very long.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see those time lapses in the Arctic as well, because you said that there was no night that went over it. So it was just strictly a sunset.
Yeah, it was either sunset or bright sun, and we were going to shoot so much time lapse that the bulk of the film is going to be time lapse. So what you end up seeing, and they told me, typical procedure with these things is the director of photography does the stuff goes to a colorist, and then you work with them. But they said you want to do the coloring, a lot of colorist work, which to me was like, it's a lot more work for me.
Yeah.
But they were like, no, we're dead set on you doing it.
Were you able to see the Northern Lights? Was that ever an opportunity? No.
We were there probably about 3 weeks too late to do that.
Okay.
But we will come back likely in October to get some of that footage.
Okay.
I did see a really cool place called the Seed Bank, which is a place maybe not a lot of people know about, but it was commissioned as a group project by several different countries, including Norway. and it's overseen by a NGO out of Germany. But it's basically a vault built into the permafrost, like in the middle of nowhere Arctic, where they hold all seeds of all plants of the entire Earth. So every country has its own section in it. So this is built as like a doomsday vault.
I've heard of that, and aren't they adding like a bunch to that now? It's in Norway, right?
Yep, it's in Norway. It's in the Norwegian territories.
Yeah, and they're adding like 500 tons of seeds now this year or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we went to that place and found it. It's cool.
That's awesome.
Real cool spot.
So where do you see yourself in? Like, this sounds like a job interview question, but where do you see yourself in 10 years? But like do you think you're going to stay in academia, or is it going to be more?
I mean, I'll always be a part of academia as much as I can, because I think there's good to be done there.
Yeah.
But especially with certain things I'd like to educate people about. Mm-hmm. And I feel like then they can go out and make a difference. Like one of those things is night sky. Like that to me is important. We live in a place where I can the year in and year out educate people that it's important, and for them to go out and do some stuff about it. So as long as I have that opportunity, I will dedicate the time for it.
Right.
But in 10 years, I mean, at this point, I've been busy no matter what. So it's going to be hopefully in 10 years some project that I really want to work on in whatever capacity makes sense. And I was given a lot of freedom on this last project. So with the Arctic and all these places that I go, I was given freedom to do whatever I want without really big oversight or like some kind of puppet master telling me these. Yeah, which is incredible, given what the context of it is. And funny because the company that they were talking about.
Way.
No, it's never. It literally is never. So they were. I mean, how funny is this? They were talking to the company that's like financing it, right, which is a major Hollywood studio.
Yeah.
And then they were asking them, so how do you want this to be, before they hired anybody? And studio was like, well, let's take some chances with this one. They said, let's make it more avant-garde. So I was like, avant-garde.
It's right up your alley.
Yeah, I was good. They started talking to me about it. I was like, I mean, I teach an avant-garde class, but I want to crack a joke. So I was like, so you guys want us to like shoot like a wall for 3 hours and then send you the footage? Like, would that work?
Yeah.
Or like just a whiteout out in winter, like bunch of snow. That's all you want. And they're like, of course they cracked up, but like, no, but take some chances and try to do things out of your perspective. Don't worry so much about what we want or what we.
It's not like a corporate look or whatever.
No.
Yeah.
What they said is we have a general shot list of things we'd like to cover because they needed to be the story to be told. But they said within that, have as much freedom as you want. Do it however you want, which is great. I mean, it's awesome. They didn't send me a bunch of storyboards like that's how it needs to be. No, they just said whatever. And they said be opportunistic, which is exactly why I was hired in the first place, because they looked at a project I did in which I was supremely ill, in that sort of frame of mind. Like, oh, that I can take advantage of that. I can take advantage of that.
They're spontaneous. Yeah.
Spontaneous. So they were like, be as spontaneous as you can, and here's a bunch of days for you to work with. So that's good.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Harun, for coming on to this interview. This was
really interesting.
I don't even know how to. I'm like kind of blown away. I'm like thinking about different things. But is there somewhere they can follow you at, or places for you to look at your gallery and such?
Yeah, you can go to skyglowproject.com. So skyglowproject.com, and you can find all the Skyglow related stuff there.
It's also on your Vimeo, right?
It's also on the Vimeo. So Vimeo stuff is going to be built into the website, so you'll be able to see all of it. And then if you just Google my name, you'll probably be able to come up with a bunch of other stuff. Because I got several sort of project websites, so you'll have to go to a specific one.
Gotcha. Okay, well, thank you again, Harun, for coming on. This is great. This is a good time. This has been another episode of the Best and Worst of the Best podcast. Once again, I am Austin Gold.
And I'm Nate Jones.
And thank you all for tuning into this interview. Be sure to tune in next time.
The Best and Worst of the Best podcast.